Hi, welcome back to Digital Defense. I am your host, Jordan Robertson, broadcasting to you live from the Bloomberg News, Washington, D.C. Bureau. This is our weekly show on cybersecurity and digital privacy. If you have any questions while we're talking about today's topic, please feel free to write them in the comment section below, and we're going to try to answer as many of those as possible. And once again, this is it's supposed to be an interactive show, so any questions you have about digital security and privacy, please feel free to fire them our way. Today we're going to be talking about a topic which will hit close to home for almost all of us, which is how do you keep track of all the data breaches that have happened, and what are you supposed to do about them when your data has been out there in some cases for years on the dark web? How do you even know if your data is on the dark web? We're going to be answering some and all of those questions today. So we thank you for joining us. Let's just dive right in. It's almost impossible to keep track of all the data breaches that have happened, especially over the past decade. As a cybersecurity reporter, I have written about many of these, but certainly not all of them. And I wanted to walk you through today, what are some of the tools that you can use to help figure out, is my data compromised? You might read about a major breach, such as a Yahoo breach, that compromised billions of records last year, which was a multi-year hacking attack that exposed those records. So you might read the headlines, but as the news cycle moves on, you might wonder, well, whatever happened to that, and am I exposed? Is that information out there? And I wanted to walk you through some of the learnings I've had as a journalist covering this space, about some of the common mistakes that people make in responding to these breaches, and just common mistakes that people make when they're setting up internet accounts and other things that could leave them vulnerable, to follow-on effects if there's a breach. So first, why don't we just start with this? I mean, there are billions of records breached every year. Now, most of those records, it's really important to note, are login credentials. So these are websites that are easy to breach. Bank of America is not getting breached every day. The website is not getting breached every day, to use one example. However, many, many others are. Mom and pop shops, e-commerce platforms, you name it. If it's on the internet and it uses login credentials, it's going to be a target. And the vast majority of these records that are breached online, again, are usernames and passwords, login records to websites. Now, if everyone used a different username and a different password for every single website you join, this wouldn't be much of an issue. There wouldn't be a need for this show today on this topic. However, most of us don't do that. Most of us will use the same email address that we use for our primary email address, and if not the same password that we use for all our accounts, something very similar. Now, the reason for that is very simple. When you're signing up for an internet service, you want to be able to be contacted by that service. If you're ordering something online, if you're joining some sort of membership organization, the reason you give those sites your email address, your primary email address, is because you want to be in contact with them. That's why you're joining them. As regular viewers of this show, will likely know, this is not a kind of shaming type of cybersecurity show. What I'm not going to do is tell you, create a different email account for every website you go to, so you've got to check 40 different email accounts just in the name of cybersecurity. That's impractical and not very valuable advice. So, starting with that, let's just start the discussion based on the fact that most of us are going to continue using our primary email address for anything we log into online. That's just the way it's going to be. Perhaps some of you have 2 email addresses, so you might switch between those, possibly even 3. But for the most part, people are going to be using 1 email address. There are some really neat tools online that allow you to check, where and whether that information has been compromised. Now, again, if you use a Gmail account, Google has a very good security team. They're obviously a hacking target too. What we're not talking about here is Google, for instance, getting hacked. We're talking about, the many, many other websites where you've used that information getting hacked and that information making its way to hackers. So there are lots of interesting tools. Like there are tools such as Credit Karma. There are many, many others. I'm going to show you a few today. This isn't a show where I advocate one particular technology over another, but I'm just trying to show you some examples of very easy, free to use tools on the internet that can tell you where your data has been compromised. So, in particular, this is the Credit Karma tool. Have you been in a data breach? And it prompts you to use your email address to search for compromised online accounts. Very simple tool. All you do is you enter your email address. Excuse me. You enter your email address, and if it comes up clean, you get a note like this. Now, what you don't want to be, this is a screenshot of what a hacker forum looks like. This is a hacker forum where they're selling all kinds of things. You see they're selling credit card information, bank account logins, enterprise security credentials, website hosting credentials, software exploits, all of these kinds of things. These are the hacker forums where criminals hang out. And you don't want to be in here, but the fact of the matter is almost all of us are. So, what do you do if you're concerned about this issue? Well, again, you can subscribe to services like the one I just showed you, or, which kind of tracks these things on an ongoing basis. And what they do, it might be interesting for some viewers, what they do is this: those kinds of services like the one I just showed you, they will monitor the dark web that's visible. Now, the reason I say the dark web that's visible is most of the dark web is not visible. You've got to be a serious, certified, hardcore hacker, criminal, to get access to these very elite forums where the most valuable data, stolen data, is bought and sold. These public forums, there's a lot of junk, there's a lot of garbage, there's some interesting stuff there, there's a lot of legitimate information there, but for the most part, there's a lot of junk. With that being said, there is still legitimate information on these forums. So what these websites do and these web services do is they will scan any information that's either available for sale on the dark web or has been posted somewhere. In some of these cases, the breach data will be posted somewhere once it's exhausted its usefulness for that particular hacking group. And that is an interesting approach to cybersecurity in terms of how do you monitor all this information. Well, you can hire a service to do that for you. That's certainly one way. And if your email address and password winds up in any of these types of accounts, if a cyber criminal is selling it, you'll get an alert. That's moderately valuable. There's a non-zero value attached to that. My personal favorite service is a company or a website called Have I Been Pwned? That's hacker lingo for owned, which means hacked. Very simple service, free to use. The guy who created it, he offers this example on his website. His name is Troy Hunt. This is, you enter your email address in, you click Have I Been Pwned or not, and in this case, it says, oh no, you've been pwned. You've been owned on 12 breach sites, and there are 4 pastes. That's for paste bin. That's when this breached data is leaked online for all to see. And then the screens will look like this. They will detail for you, here are all the different breaches where your email address and password in many cases, have been compromised. I find it to be a very useful tool because you might see news about a breach like, let's say, the Adobe breach in October 2013. Some of you may remember when Adobe announced a really massive breach involving over 150 million Adobe accounts. Now, that news cycle on that story, I'm sure much to the happiness of Adobe, it was very short. I mean, it was a couple of days at most. But these are hundreds of millions of people like you and me, whose information will wind up on the dark web. Now, in this case, this was a breach of the actual Adobe systems, if I remember correctly. So that's a very serious breach because that's the primary company that you've entrusted your data to. So I find this website, again, haveibeenpwned.com. I'll show it again for you if you didn't see it. PWNED. I find this to be a very useful site because it can link you in memory, to these breaches that you might have read about but not studied in depth. And so the next question becomes, okay, what do you do with this information? So you've just been told, all right, like I was part of these breaches. What should I do? My biggest piece of advice is always this, and you'll hear this from lots of cybersecurity experts. Again, as I said at the top of the show, what I'm not going to do is advise you to do the thing which will give you the most security, which is use a different email address, a different password, different login credentials for every single account. If you do that, If somebody sees, the throwaway email address that you use to log into, a company X's website, it won't matter to you because you haven't used either of those credentials for any other site. But again, I know that's not the way the world works, and it shouldn't be the way the world works. You shouldn't be, your life shouldn't be complicated by use of technology. It should be helped in some way. So what I typically advise is it's understood that people are going to use their primary email address for most things. So in that case, try to use a different password for each site. So that way, even if your email address shows up in an attack like these, a lot of the notices you'll see on these alerts are that usernames are stolen, but passwords were encrypted when they were stolen. Some are encrypted better than others. In the Yahoo breach, in fact, they were the passwords were stolen, but most of them were encrypted in a very easy to crack format. So then people's passwords got leaked as well. The problem with that becomes if you've used the same username and password everywhere on the internet. If you wind up in one of these breaches and the hackers can compromise your password as well, they can crack any encryption on it, you're going to be in trouble for any site you log into. And this is very standard security advice, but it bears repeating because it's very convenient and easy to use the same credentials for every website you log into. But the point of this show is, even if these breaches are old, like the Adobe breach was 2013, that breach can come back to haunt you if you haven't cleaned up your records since. So use a different password for every website you visit. It's okay to use the same email address. That's just kind of human nature. But try to use a different password on each website you visit so that when breaches like this happen, you're going to lower your chances of being affected. So we're getting some questions coming in, and I'll put out the call again. I mean, anybody who wants to ask questions about cybersecurity or digital privacy, please feel free to put those questions in the comments section of wherever you're watching this, whether it's the Bloomberg Terminal or Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, or any other platform. First question here is, can I do a Google search for my private information? Will anything that was compromised just show up? It's not really that easy. As I said, I recommend a free sites like haveibeenpwned.com. That won't give you all of your personal information that's been compromised, but it'll give you kind of the most important ones. And the reason I say that is this, is that, what a site like that won't give you, is your credit card information. Like, it won't tell you, Jordan Robertson's credit card account, was breached on X date. It doesn't scan that kind of information. But it's not really supposed to, and it doesn't really have to. One of the things that I've marveled at, as I've covered this topic for over a decade, is it used to be the banks were getting hacked all the time. They were so bad at stopping credit card fraud against their banks. Now, it was always seen as a cost of doing business, but with hacking becoming more normal, more of a normal threat to them, they just started losing, billions of dollars, to all kinds of online fraud. The banks have gotten so much better about alerting users, customers, if they've been victimized in a credit card breach. So it's less useful for you, in my view, to try to go search for your credit card information online. That's not only because the banks have gotten so good at flagging suspicious transactions, but the banks also scour the dark web as well. The banks use consultants and employees to penetrate very deeply these dark web forums looking for their information. It's what you would expect a bank to do to protect its data and to protect its assets. So don't go looking for your bank information. It's just not going to be that fruitful for you. But look for your email address, look for your password, as we just described, and really, again, focus on the password. If you create decent enough passwords for the majority of websites you visit, now again, they don't have to be the strongest thing in the world if the site you're visiting is kind of an innocuous site where you're not going to be transacting with financial data, you're not going to be posting personal information, not like an email account. If it's just the website where you don't know, you schedule your yoga class for the day or whatever, like, that's not going to be as valuable as obviously your banking account. So I would say make sure to rank in priority what you want to protect. Question here is, should I use a VPN? Depends on, this is kind of a pet topic of mine, this idea of VPNs. It really depends on what you're trying to protect and who you're trying to protect your data from leaking to. If you're trying not to get hacked, a VPN's not really going to help you there. What a VPN will do is it will shield your data from your internet provider. Now, if you're using public Wi-Fi, that's really helpful because anybody can be spying on that public Wi-Fi. Really helpful in that case to use a VPN to tunnel in, create an encrypted connection, and protect your data that way. However, if what you're trying to do is protect your data from hackers on the other side of that transaction, on the website side, a VPN won't help you, won't prevent you your personal data from getting hacked on any of those websites. You're just not in control of that security. So the two main use cases for VPN, again, public Wi-Fi, that's a great use case for kind of ordinary folks who want some added security, and then of course corporate instances. So if you work for a corporation that allows telecommuting and such, you'll be very familiar with the fact that when you log in, you're logging in via a VPN, via an encrypted connection. And of course, that's very valuable because you're logging into a corporate network. But for ordinary people just surfing the web every day, it's almost not that useful because you're protecting your data from leaking to the ISP, but you're giving all kinds of data still to the entity on the other side, Google or Yahoo or Facebook or whatever. So somebody's collecting a lot of data, and if you're logging on from your home network, it's fair to assume that it's probably reasonably better protected than the public Wi-Fi hotspot, which is a bigger target for hackers. Next question here. We're getting some good ones. Thank you for those of you who wrote in before the show, and those of you who are writing in now. We really appreciate the questions and the engagement. Once I find out my data was hacked, can I ever recover it? Interesting story about recovering data. It's a natural impulse, an instinct to say, hey, you stole my username and password. Can I get it back? I don't want it out there. The answer is no. Once the data is stolen, it is copied and copied and copied again and sold to the highest bidder, and then the second highest bidder, and the third highest bidder, and on and on. This data has a shelf life, especially financial data. So if your credit card information is stolen, for instance, the shelf life on credit cards is so infinitesimally small because the first time there are a couple of fraudulent transactions, the bank's just going to cancel it. They're going to send you a new card, and the scam is over, and the threat is eliminated. Data like usernames and passwords have a longer shelf life. So there are many, many types of buyers for that information, primarily scammers and other hackers. So no, don't try to get your information back. Don't think that it's even possible. What you can do is just be proactive about changing your passwords when you see big breaches, even if you haven't gotten an alert. This is a mistake I think a lot of people make, which is, okay, Yahoo was breached. And they first announced, well, it was 500 million accounts. That's a huge breach. Then it came out that it was 1 billion accounts. And then I think it came out that it was 3 billion. It was every account they ever had. Yahoo was one of the worst data breaches in the history of computing. And because that company got bought, the company sold itself, I feel like that didn't really get the attention it kind of deserved. So don't try to recover your data. Don't think about recovering your data. It's kind of it's a pointless exercise. What you should do instead is just be proactive. When you see breaches like that, assume that you're part of it. And if it involves login credentials, change your password. It's just a simple thing to do. It's not going to fully protect you against every kind of hack, but it's a proactive step that you can take to feel better. And again, try to use different passwords for every site, even if the email you use is the same. And an interesting story about recovering data, there is a caveat here, which is if you are a corporation, you run a corporation, and somebody steals your private corporate information, there are services out there where they will try to go out and get your data back for you. In fact, the former chief security officer of Uber, a very well-known security expert named Joe Sullivan, is caught up in a huge controversy at that company, over his security team's efforts to basically recover, data that was stolen from kind of an unsecured web server of theirs. And they paid a very large bounty, thousands and thousands of dollars to this hacker who had the information, and they sought evidence that that hacker had removed that data from their computer. It wrapped up in Uber's larger management controversy, and that's still going to play out in the courts. But it was a good example of, top flight security teams will take steps to recover stolen corporate data. But when it comes to your passwords and usernames and passwords and things like that, as an individual, it's just not worth the effort to go out and search for it. Next question here is, was Discover breached in the last few days? Could my credit card info be on the dark web? I don't know about any particular breach of Discover in the last few days. It might have been. I just haven't followed it, but I don't believe so. you should just assume that your credit card information is already available in some form or another to hackers. Now, whether it's been used or not is a different matter, because actually, and a lot of people don't know this, they think that if your credit card information gets out there, it's immediately going to be used and it's immediately going to be exploited. That's actually not the case, because hacker operations to it's easier in many cases to steal that data than it is to actually monetize it. And the reason is this: you have to have multiple bank accounts, on all different sides of this equation to collect money, to receive money, to cash out money, to buy things, to launder things, to fence them. Like the operations to steal this data and hack it are very different than the ones to actually monetize it. And again, banks are very attuned to transactions that look suspicious. Like if you haven't gone out and bought a $3,000 TV in the last 10 years, and all of a sudden you're buying multiple $3,000 TVs from Costco over the internet, like they're going to know, and they're going to cancel those transactions, or they're going to block them or call you or whatever. So the banks are getting really good at detecting those fraudulent transactions. So when I say you should assume that your information is already out there, but it may just not be used yet, it's kind of common sense, good internet hygiene to just pay attention to your bank accounts. Again, your banks are going to be looking at it far more closely than you are in many cases, but it'll be silent. But if you start to notice suspicious transactions, they're so easy to get reversed in many cases with most large banks or credit card processors. So basically the big advice here on banking information is don't sweat about it too much. Don't sweat it too much, but pay attention for any suspicious transactions, of course. And the one caveat there is your bank login information. If your bank login information appears on any of these dark web forums, that, of course, could be used against you to access your accounts and steal money from you in a way that you might not expect. The next question here, we've got really good ones coming in, is how is it possible to slow down the selling of data that criminals get from data breaches? What steps should law enforcement take? Well, I should also mention that, on these dark web forums, they're crawling with law enforcement, intelligence services, law enforcement, FBI agents, local police, anyone with a mandate to do cybersecurity, is on these forums trying to stop the sale or catch the hackers behind them. So there's really no way that I know of outside of kind of normal law enforcement activities to try to stop or slow the sale of this type of data. The best thing you can actually do is not rely on law enforcement to catch these hackers, because part of the problem is these investigations are long and complex, and it's got to be a really big, important breach for a federal law enforcement agency to be willing to devote agents full-time, for potentially months on end to uncovering the bad guys. So literally the best thing you can do is do the basic internet hygiene of change your passwords regularly. And they don't even have to be, and this is a good piece of advice too, they don't even have to be crazy long, crazy complex passwords. Some people recommend phrases, some people recommend phrases with numbers and characters and things like that. Something that you can remember, but it's just harder than password 12345 or whatever that somebody might very easily guess or have a computer algorithm guess. So that's kind of your best way to protect against these types of attacks. And again, just keeping a close eye on your accounts. If you notice suspicious activity on your account, chances are the bank's going to notice it before you do. But it's a good idea to just peek at it from time to time just to make sure that everything looks right. That's actually the best way, because there's a big market for this stuff. But as I said earlier in the show, when it comes to credit card data, the lifespan of stolen credit card data has just shrunk dramatically in recent years because banks and law enforcement have gotten a lot better about spotting fraud involving that data. Can we recover a hacked email address by contacting the company? I'm not sure what the viewer means by recover a hacked email address, but if what you're referring to is if you've got a Facebook account, your Facebook account was hacked, somebody stole your username and your password, can you contact Facebook to get your account back? Absolutely. I mean, these companies are not in the business of keeping legitimate users off their services. They're going to make you jump through some hoops. They're going to make you prove who you are. That's typically a process that involves physical means too, like sending in a photo of you and your driver's license, validating yourself in other ways. But all the major services have these protections built in. They're not just going to give you the account because you asked for it. You wouldn't want somebody to be able to take over your account that way. So it may take a couple of days in those cases, and you have to prove yourself. But these big services have those services available. and they're generally pretty good about getting you back online. The problem is you want to find a way, if your account is hacked, to notify friends and family that, hey, my account is hacked. If somebody writes you asking for money or asking for a wire transfer or asking for some sort of other financial or help, be aware that my account is hacked, and that's very likely the criminal, because that's one of the reasons hackers compromise these accounts. It's so they can spread malware and financial scams to people who are trusted friends and family of those account holders, because you will open those emails. They come from a friend. Another question here is, how do people find out their data is on the dark web? Should everyone try to check even if they don't think they were involved in a hack like Equifax? Well, this question kind of cuts to the heart of the point of today's show, which is there are things you can do. There are ways that you can check if some of your data is on the dark web. Again, username, password, things like that. But I don't think that it's something you should really spend too much time on, to be honest with you, because these services will basically give you a snapshot of how often your username and password have been compromised. But these are all public breaches. I mean, the thing you have to remember about is these are breaches that have been public and have long been public. So long, in fact, that security researchers have been able to get the data, buy the data, get the data. Maybe the data leaks. Maybe the data is pasted, in full online. So that is data that has next to no value for most cyber criminals, most serious cyber criminals at that point. So you might spend a lot of effort trying to figure out what information is out there. There are services, there are higher-end services. One of the companies is called Digital Shadows, that I've talked with them, and there are others as well, that will look for very specific types of corporate data, especially where if you are a corporation, you're going to have different needs. So the topic I'm talking to today is consumers, the average consumer like me. I wouldn't spend too much time on it, but I would suggest going to a website like Have I Been Pwned, again, P-W-N-E-D, or Credit Karma, or any of these other places that offer these dark web scanning services. If it's part of a service that you're already subscribed to, then I say great. You can take a look at it, but don't be alarmed, because chances are, like with the LinkedIn breach or Yahoo or these other large breaches, over time, and it does take them sometimes months to get this right, they will change people's passwords proactively. They'll put other protections on people's accounts and such. So don't spend too much time worrying about, is my data on the dark web? Chances are some or a lot of it already is. It's all about what can you do, what change can you affect to improve your own cybersecurity. And again, I keep coming back to this. Use decent passwords. And I haven't said this on the show yet today, but I'm surprised I haven't. You've got to use two-factor authentication. It is not a silver bullet. There are ways around it. I talk to very, very highly skilled hackers all the time, and they'll tell you there are 1.5 million ways around those protections. But for most people, if you've got a text message alert every time you log into your account and you have to enter a special code, I mean, that's going to stop 99% of the attacks against your account. So even if somebody steals your username and password, they still require a targeted attack to get into your account. And look, if somebody wants to hack your account, they want to compromise you personally, there are 100 different ways they can do that, but that's not the use case for most people. Last question here, and then we are out of time. How do we detect if our data has been breached? As I mentioned earlier in the show, there are lots of services online. Have I Been Pwned, Pwned.com. I realize this sounds like an ad for that site, but I just think it's a good central resource to start, a place to start your search. I think that's a great site. There are lots of other services as well that are pretty easy to find. Just beware that if you pay for one of these services, you may not get exactly what you're hoping to get. You're going to get a lot of data that appears in kind of the lower value regions of the dark web. The higher value regions are data that come from ongoing hacks, hacks that haven't been discovered, hacks that are the result of zero-day vulnerabilities and such, which are very high-end hacks and data that will be instantly valuable to higher-end hackers. So it's just worth noting that the data you'll see come up on many of these sites and services are from publicly announced breaches, and that kind of limits their usefulness to attackers. Well, with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much for your questions. We really appreciate you watching the show. I hope I'm giving you valuable advice and practical advice about some basic things you can do to improve your online security. It's actually not that hard. Cybersecurity is a fascinating topic. Of course, it is my career. It's what I do all day, every day for this job. But for practical purposes, it's actually not that hard. It's not that complex to secure yourself. So with that, thank you very much for watching. We broadcast live at noon Eastern every Thursday from the Bloomberg News Bureau in Washington, D.C. You can catch me on Twitter, which is @JordanR1000. And also check out Bloomberg.com/technology. That's the global technology webpage where we've got archived versions of this show, as well as a webcast by my colleague Mark Gurman and the Decrypted podcast from the global technology team. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next week on Digital Defense.